She thought her marriage was built on trust. She thought blood was thicker than water. But the night she discovered her husband and her own sister together in her bed, everything shattered. What she did next would shock an entire city. This is the story of Rebecca Mitchell, a woman whose life was perfect on paper, a woman who had everything to lose, and a woman who chose revenge over forgiveness. Because when the two people you trust most in this world betray you at the same time, in the same bed, in your own home, some wounds are too deep to heal. They can only be avenged. And what Rebecca did, the choice she made in the silence of her heartbreak, would set into motion a series of events so dark, so calculated, that even seasoned detectives would call it one of the most chilling cases they'd ever seen. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning, to when Rebecca still believed in love, when she still trusted her sister, when she still thought her family was untouchable. Rebecca Mitchell was 32 years old when her world fell apart. She was a loan officer at a bank in a quiet Florida suburb, the kind of woman people described as dependable, warm, kind. She had that gentle smile that made you feel safe, the kind of person who remembered your kids' names and asked about your mother's surgery. Rebecca wasn't chasing fame or fortune. She just wanted what so many of us want: a good life, a loving family, someone to grow old with. And for 8 years, she thought she had found exactly that. She met David Mitchell at a church barbecue when she was 24. He was older, 36 at the time, a telecommunications technician who had been married before. Twice, actually. But Rebecca didn't see red flags. She saw a man who'd been hurt, a man who was ready to settle down, a man who told her she was different from anyone he'd ever met. David had a steady job with the phone company. He was kind to her parents, and he made her laugh. 6 months after they met, he proposed, and Rebecca said yes without hesitation. They built a life together, a modest 3-bedroom house with a backyard where they hosted weekend barbecues. 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, who filled the house with noise and laughter. Rebecca's job at the bank was stable, David's income was decent, and together they were comfortable. Not rich, but comfortable. They went to parent-teacher conferences together. They argued about small things, forgetting to take out the trash, whose turn it was to do the dishes. Normal things, the kind of arguments that mean nothing in the grand scheme of life. From the outside, the Mitchells looked like the American dream. But dreams, as we all know, can turn into nightmares when you're not looking. And Rebecca's nightmare had a name. Her name was Stephanie. Stephanie Monroe was Rebecca's younger sister, 3 years younger to be exact. Growing up, the two girls had been inseparable. They shared a bedroom, traded clothes, covered for each other when one of them snuck out past curfew. Stephanie was the wild one, the one who dropped out of high school, the one who married too young and divorced even younger. She'd had a rough few years, bouncing between jobs, between boyfriends, between apartments. And Rebecca, being the older sister, the responsible one, had always been there to help. When Stephanie needed a place to stay, Rebecca opened her door. When Stephanie needed money, Rebecca loaned it to her, never asking when she'd get it back. When Stephanie cried about another failed relationship, Rebecca listened, made tea, told her it would get better. Because that's what sisters do. That's what family does. You show up, you help, you love unconditionally. Rebecca never imagined that unconditional love could be a weapon. She never imagined that the person sleeping in her guest room, eating at her table, playing with her children, was sleeping with her husband. Looking back, Rebecca would realize there were signs, small things, tiny cracks in the facade that she dismissed because, well, who wants to believe the worst about the people they love? It started about 6 months before everything exploded. Stephanie had been staying with them for a few weeks after another breakup, another eviction, another crisis. David had been working late more often. "Big project at work," he'd say, kissing Rebecca on the forehead as he grabbed his keys. "Don't wait up." Rebecca didn't wait up. She trusted him. When Stephanie offered to help David with errands, Rebecca thought it was sweet. "I'll go with him to Home Depot," Stephanie would say. "You've been working so hard, Becca. You deserve a break." Rebecca would smile, grateful, thinking how lucky she was to have a sister who cared, a husband who didn't mind the help. But then there were the text messages. Rebecca wasn't the type to snoop. She respected privacy. But one evening David's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. Rebecca glanced at it, not meaning to pry, just a reflexive look. The message was from Stephanie. "Can't stop thinking about last night." Rebecca's stomach dropped. Her hands went cold. But she pushed the feeling down, rationalized it. Maybe they'd had a deep conversation. Maybe Stephanie had confided in David about something. Maybe it was innocent. She didn't ask. She didn't want to seem paranoid, insecure, jealous. And that's the thing about betrayal. It relies on the victim's goodness, their willingness to give the benefit of the doubt, their fear of seeming crazy. Rebecca noticed other things too, the way David and Stephanie would share inside jokes she wasn't part of. The way Stephanie's eyes would linger on David just a second too long. The way David's hand would brush Stephanie's back when he walked past her in the kitchen, a touch that seemed familiar. Too familiar. One night, Rebecca came home early from work. She'd forgotten an important file and needed to grab it before a morning meeting. The house was quiet. David's truck was in the driveway. Stephanie's car was there too. Rebecca walked in through the front door, calling out hello. No answer. She walked toward the bedroom, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite name. And then she heard it. Laughter, low, intimate laughter, coming from the guest room. Rebecca stood in the hallway, frozen. Her mind raced through explanations. They're watching something funny on TV. They're looking at old photos. There's a reasonable explanation. But deep down, in that place where instinct lives, where truth hides before we're ready to face it, Rebecca knew. She knew. She didn't open the door that night. She turned around, walked back to her car, sat in the driveway for 20 minutes trying to breathe. Then she drove back to work, grabbed the file she needed, and told herself she'd imagined it. But the knowing had already taken root. It was a Tuesday. Rebecca would remember that detail forever. A Tuesday in October, one of those crisp autumn evenings when the air smells like wood smoke and possibility. She was supposed to be at a work conference downtown, a 2-day event about mortgage lending regulations. Boring, but mandatory. She'd packed a small suitcase, kissed the kids goodbye, reminded David about soccer practice. "I'll be back Thursday," she'd told him. Stephanie said she'd help with the kids. David had smiled, kissed her, told her he'd miss her. But Tuesday afternoon the conference was canceled. The keynote speaker had a family emergency, and they decided to postpone the whole thing. Rebecca tried calling David to let him know she was coming home early. His phone went straight to voicemail. She tried Stephanie. Same thing. Rebecca didn't think much of it. She was actually excited. She'd surprise them. Maybe pick up pizza on the way home. Make it a fun, unexpected family night. She stopped at their favorite pizza place, got 2 large pies, the kids' favorite breadsticks. She hummed along to the radio on the drive home, thinking about how nice it would be to sleep in her own bed tonight instead of a hotel room. She pulled into the driveway at 7:30. David's truck was there. Stephanie's car was parked behind it. The lights were on in the house. Everything looked normal, peaceful. Rebecca carried the pizza boxes to the front door, balancing them on one hip as she fumbled for her keys. She unlocked the door, stepped inside. "Surprise!" she called out. "Conference got canceled, so I brought—" The house was quiet. Too quiet. No TV sounds, no voices. Where were the kids? And then she remembered. Soccer practice. Her mother had offered to pick them up and take them for ice cream afterward. They wouldn't be home until 9. Which meant... Rebecca set the pizza boxes on the kitchen counter. She stood there for a moment, listening. Nothing. Maybe David and Stephanie went for a walk. Maybe they're in the backyard. But their cars are here. Rebecca walked toward the hallway, her footsteps soft on the carpet. And then she heard it. A sound that made her blood turn to ice. A moan, a woman's moan, coming from her bedroom. Rebecca's legs moved on autopilot, carrying her down the hallway even as her brain screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to leave. She reached the bedroom door. It was closed, but not all the way. A sliver of light cut through the gap. Rebecca's hand trembled as she pushed the door open, just an inch, just enough to see. And there they were, in her bed. The bed she shared with David. The bed where she'd given birth to her daughter when they couldn't make it to the hospital in time. The bed where she'd cried when her father died. The bed where she'd felt safe. David was on top of Stephanie. Her sister's legs were wrapped around Rebecca's husband's waist. Stephanie's head was thrown back, her mouth open. David's face was buried in her neck. The sheets, Rebecca's sheets, the ones with the blue flowers she'd picked out at Target, were tangled around them. Rebecca stood there, frozen. Time stopped. Or maybe it sped up. She couldn't tell. Her brain couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. This isn't real, she thought. This is a nightmare. I'm going to wake up. But she didn't wake up, because this wasn't a nightmare. This was her life. This was her husband. This was her sister. This was betrayal in its purest, most poisonous form. Rebecca didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't burst into the room and flip the mattress like women do in movies. She simply stepped back, closed the door softly, and walked away. She walked back down the hallway, past the kitchen where the pizza was getting cold, past the living room where her children's toys were scattered on the floor. She walked out the front door, got in her car, and drove. She didn't know where she was going. She just drove, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white, her vision blurred with tears she wouldn't let fall. Not yet. Not yet. Because if she started crying now, she might never stop. And Rebecca needed to think. She needed to plan. Because in that moment, standing in her hallway, watching her husband make love to her sister in the bed they shared, something inside Rebecca Mitchell broke. And something else, something cold and dark and calculating, took its place. Before we continue with what happened next, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Rebecca drove for hours that night. She drove through neighborhoods she didn't recognize, past strip malls and gas stations and churches with lit-up crosses. She drove until her gas tank was nearly empty, until her hands stopped shaking, until the shock began to fade and the rage began to build. When she finally pulled over, she was in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. She sat there, engine off, staring at her phone. 15 missed calls from David, 7 from Stephanie, a dozen text messages. "Where are you?" "Babe, I'm worried. Please call me back." Rebecca laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound. Worried. He was worried. She turned off her phone. She couldn't deal with their voices, their lies, their excuses. Not yet. Rebecca walked into the diner and sat in a corner booth. A tired waitress brought her coffee she didn't drink and a menu she didn't open. She just sat there, staring at the tabletop, her mind racing. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Had they laughed about her? Had they made plans? Had David ever loved her at all, or had she just been convenient? And Stephanie, her sister, her baby sister, the girl she'd protected from bullies in middle school, the girl whose hand she'd held during their mother's cancer treatments, the girl she would have died for. How could she? But Rebecca knew how. Because people are capable of terrible things when they want something badly enough. And apparently, Stephanie had wanted David, and David had wanted Stephanie. And Rebecca, good, trusting, faithful Rebecca, had given them every opportunity. She'd welcomed Stephanie into her home. She'd worked late to give David space. She'd been blind. No, not blind, willfully ignorant, because some part of her had known. Some part of her had seen the signs and chosen to look away because facing the truth was too painful, too humiliating, too devastating. but she couldn't look away anymore. The truth was staring her in the face, and it was ugly. Rebecca sat in that diner until 3 a.m, and somewhere between her 4th cup of coffee and the sunrise that bled through the windows, something shifted inside her. She realized she had a choice. She could go home, confront them, scream and cry and demand explanations. She could file for divorce, split custody of the kids, divide the assets. She could tell her family, let them pick sides, watch her mother cry and her father rage. She could try to rebuild her life from the ashes of this betrayal, go to therapy, heal, move on. Or she could make them pay, make them feel even a fraction of the pain they'd caused her, make them regret ever touching each other, ever betraying her, ever taking her for granted. Rebecca thought about her children. She thought about splitting holidays, about their confused faces when Mommy and Daddy explained they weren't together anymore. She thought about David eventually marrying Stephanie, because of course he would. And she thought about having to see them together at family gatherings, at school events, at her own children's wedding someday. She thought about smiling and pretending it didn't destroy her every single time. And Rebecca realized she couldn't do it. She couldn't live with that. She couldn't let them win. She couldn't let them walk away from this with their happiness intact while hers lay in ruins. By the time the sun was fully up, Rebecca had made her decision. She drove home. David's truck was still in the driveway. Stephanie's car was gone. Good. She didn't want to see either of them yet. Rebecca walked into her house. David was in the kitchen making coffee, his hair messy, his eyes red. He looked up when she walked in, relief flooding his face. "Oh, thank God," he said, moving toward her. "I was so worried. Where were you? Why didn't you answer your phone?" Rebecca looked at him, really looked at him. This man she'd loved for 8 years, this man she'd trusted with her heart, her body, her children, her future, and she felt nothing. The love was gone, burned away by what she'd seen. "I went for a drive," Rebecca said, her voice calm. Too calm. "Needed to clear my head." David studied her face. "Are you okay? You look tired," Rebecca said. "I'm just tired. Long day." David didn't push. Probably because he was relieved she wasn't asking questions. Probably because he thought he'd gotten away with it. Rebecca went about her day as if nothing had changed. She made breakfast for the kids. She went to work. She came home, made dinner, helped with homework, tucked the children into bed. David watched her warily, like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But Rebecca just smiled, kissed him goodnight, and lay awake in the dark, in the bed where she'd caught him with her sister, planning. She needed help. She needed someone who could do what she couldn't do herself. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who could make David and Stephanie disappear. And Rebecca knew exactly where to find someone like that. Rebecca had never broken the law in her life. She'd never even gotten a speeding ticket. The idea of hiring someone to commit murder would have seemed absurd to her just a week ago, impossible, the stuff of movies and crime shows. But that was before she'd seen her husband and her sister tangled in her sheets. Before rage had calcified in her chest, hard and cold and permanent. Now, as she sat in her car outside a dive bar on the wrong side of town, Rebecca felt nothing but determination. She'd spent 3 days searching, 3 days of careful, methodical research. She'd used the library computer, not her own. She'd created a fake email address. She'd searched through online classified ads, the kind that lived in the shadowy corners of the internet where people bought and sold things that couldn't be mentioned in polite company. And she'd found him. Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old ex-military guy, honorably discharged after 2 tours in Afghanistan. He'd placed an ad offering security services and problem-solving. The ad was vague enough to be legal, but specific enough that certain people would understand what he was really offering. Rebecca had sent him a message from her fake email. Need to discuss a permanent solution to a personal problem. Willing to pay well. He'd responded within an hour. They'd arranged to meet at this bar, neutral ground, public enough to be safe, but private enough to talk. Rebecca took a deep breath, checked her makeup in the rearview mirror, and walked inside. The bar smelled like stale beer and cigarette smoke, the kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. Marcus was sitting in a corner booth, exactly where he'd said he'd be. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He looked exactly like what he was: dangerous. Rebecca slid into the booth across from him. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her neat blouse, her wedding ring, the careful way she'd applied her lipstick that morning. "You're not what I expected," Marcus said. His voice was gravelly, rough. Rebecca met his eyes. "Neither are you." That made him smile. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "You mentioned a problem." Rebecca nodded. She'd rehearsed this conversation in her head 100 times. She'd thought about being vague, dancing around the subject, maintaining plausible deniability. But sitting there, looking at this man who'd killed people in war and was clearly willing to kill people for money, Rebecca decided on a different approach. Honesty. "My husband is having an affair with my sister," Rebecca said, her voice steady. "I want them both gone." Marcus didn't flinch, didn't look surprised. He just nodded, like she'd told him something as mundane as the weather. "Gone as in gone," he asked, "or gone as in scared off?" "Dead," Rebecca said. The word tasted strange in her mouth, bitter, but also right. "I want them dead." Marcus leaned back, studying her again. "You know what you're asking me to do?" "Yes." "You know there's no going back from this?" "Yes." "You understand if you change your mind halfway through, if you panic and go to the cops, I will make sure you go down harder than anyone?" Rebecca's hands were folded on the table. They weren't shaking. "I'm not going to change my mind." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he named a figure. $50,000. $25,000 up front, $25,000 when the job was done. Rebecca didn't blink. She'd already thought about the money. She and David had a joint savings account with $30,000. She was the loan officer at a bank, which meant she had access to resources. She could make it work. "How?" Rebecca asked. Marcus shook his head. "You don't need to know how. You just need to give me information. Where they'll be, when they'll be alone, what their routines are. I'll handle the rest." "I want it to look like an accident," Rebecca said. "Or a robbery gone wrong, something that doesn't point back to me." "It never points back to the client," Marcus said. "That's the whole point." They talked for another 20 minutes. Rebecca gave him David's schedule, the fact that he usually went for a run every morning at 6, the back roads he took where nobody else ever was. She told him about Stephanie's apartment, the fact that she lived alone, the fact that the building had no security cameras. Marcus took notes on his phone. No paper trail. Smart. Before Rebecca left, Marcus looked at her one more time. "Last chance to walk away," he said. Rebecca thought about David's face as he'd kissed Stephanie. She thought about her sister's legs wrapped around her husband's body. She thought about all the nights she'd lain awake wondering why she wasn't enough, why her love hadn't been enough to keep David faithful, why her own blood had betrayed her. "I'm not walking away," Rebecca said. They shook hands, like a business deal. Because that's what it was, a transaction. Rebecca was buying revenge, and Marcus was selling it. Rebecca drove home. She made dinner. She helped her daughter with her science project. She kissed David goodnight, and when he reached for her in the dark, she let him. She let him touch her, even though her skin crawled. She let him think everything was normal, because Marcus had told her the most important thing. Act normal. Don't change your routine. Don't give anyone a reason to suspect. And Rebecca was very, very good at acting normal. After all, she'd been doing it for weeks, ever since she'd first suspected something was wrong. She could do it a little longer, just until Marcus finished the job, just until David and Stephanie paid for what they'd done. If you've made it this far, type "I'm still here" in the comments. Do you believe betrayal from family cuts deeper than betrayal from anyone else? Type yes or no in the comments. We want to hear what you think. And if you believe no wife should ever have to face such a betrayal, hit the like button right now. Because what happens next, you won't believe. Marcus Webb was a professional. He'd done this before, though he'd never admit it to anyone, especially not in a court of law. He'd learned patience in the military, learned to watch, to wait, to strike when the target was most vulnerable. He spent 5 days surveilling David Mitchell, watched him leave for work every morning at 7:30, watched him stop at the same coffee shop every day at 8, watched him come home, kiss his wife, play with his kids, pretend to be a decent man. Marcus felt nothing for David Mitchell. In his line of work, you couldn't afford to feel. Empathy made you sloppy, made you hesitate, and hesitation got you caught. But Marcus did feel something for Rebecca. Not sympathy exactly, more like recognition. He'd seen that look before. That cold determination in the eyes of someone who'd been pushed too far. That willingness to cross lines they'd never imagined crossing. He'd seen it in the mirror after his own wife left him, taking the kids, taking the house, taking everything that mattered. He'd seen it in other clients over the years. Good people driven to do terrible things because the world had treated them terribly first. On day 6, Marcus made his move. It was a Thursday morning. David went for his usual run at 6 a.m., before the sun was fully up, before the neighborhood woke. He ran the same route every time, down Maple Street, left on Oakwood Drive, through the park, past the lake, back around. 4 miles. Takes about 35 minutes. Marcus knew this because he'd timed it. 3 times. Marcus waited in his car on the far side of the lake, where the running path curved through a heavily wooded area. No houses nearby, no security cameras, just trees and morning mist and the sound of birds waking up. David came jogging around the bend at 6:22, right on schedule. He was wearing earbuds, listening to music probably, not paying attention to his surroundings. People never do. They think the world is safe. They think bad things happen to other people in other places. They're wrong. Marcus stepped out from the trees. David saw him at the last second, pulled out one earbud. "Morning," David said, friendly, unsuspecting. Marcus pulled the gun from his jacket. David's eyes went wide. He opened his mouth to scream, to plead, to ask why. Marcus shot him twice. Center mass, military training. David dropped like a stone. Marcus stood over him for a moment, watching the light fade from David's eyes, watching him realize he was dying, watching him understand. Then Marcus dragged David's body off the path, deeper into the woods, where it wouldn't be found for a while. He wiped down the gun, planted it near the body, made it look like a mugging gone wrong. Jogger shot by a desperate junkie looking for money. Happens all the time. Marcus left the way he'd come, calm, unhurried. Nobody saw him. Nobody ever did. That was the thing about being invisible. People only saw what they expected to see, and they never expected to see a killer. 3 days later, Marcus went after Stephanie Monroe. She was easier. Lived alone in a second-floor apartment with a faulty lock on the patio door. Marcus had checked. Stephanie was careless, left her curtains open, didn't have an alarm system, made herself an easy target. She came home from her waitressing job at 9 p.m. on a Sunday night. Marcus was already inside, waiting in her bedroom closet. He'd been there for 2 hours. Patience. Always patience. Stephanie walked in, tossed her purse on the couch, kicked off her shoes. She went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of wine, turned on the TV. Some reality show about people screaming at each other. Stephanie watched for a while, scrolling through her phone. Then she went to the bedroom to change. Marcus stepped out of the closet as she was pulling off her work shirt. She spun around, gasped, stumbled backward. "Who? What?" Marcus didn't say anything. He never did. Talking created evidence. Talking made it personal. And this wasn't personal. This was business. He used his hands, quieter than a gun, harder to trace. Stephanie fought. She clawed at his face, tried to scream, but Marcus was stronger, trained, relentless. It took 3 minutes, felt longer, probably felt like an eternity to Stephanie, but 3 minutes. Marcus left through the patio door, wiped everything down, made it look like a break-in, a sexual assault gone wrong. Statistics would back him up. Single woman, living alone, ground floor apartment with a broken lock. Tragic, but predictable. Marcus drove to a motel 40 miles away, paid cash, slept like a baby. In the morning, he called Rebecca from a burner phone. "It's done," he said. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Both of them?" Another pause. Then, "Thank you." Marcus hung up. He never spoke to Rebecca Mitchell again. Didn't need to. The second half of his payment appeared in his offshore account 2 days later, just like they'd agreed. Professional to the end. David Mitchell's body was discovered on a Thursday afternoon by a woman walking her dog in the woods near the lake. She'd seen the blood first, then followed the trail to where Marcus had dragged him. She screamed so loud the neighbors 3 blocks away heard her. The police came. Homicide detectives, forensic teams, the whole circus. They took photos, collected evidence, interviewed the joggers and dog walkers who used that path regularly. Nobody had seen anything. Nobody had heard anything. Just another senseless killing in an increasingly violent world. Rebecca played the grieving widow perfectly. She collapsed when the detectives came to tell her. She cried all the right tears, said all the right things. "I don't understand. Who would do this? He was just going for a run. He always went for a run." The detectives were sympathetic. They told her they'd find whoever did this. They told her it looked like a robbery. David's wallet was gone. His wedding ring. Probably some desperate addict looking for quick cash. Wrong place, wrong time. Rebecca nodded, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Inside she felt relief. It was done. David was gone. The detectives asked the usual questions. Did David have any enemies? Any problems at work? Any reason someone might want to hurt him? Rebecca shook her head. No. David was beloved. Everyone liked him. He was a good man, a good father, a good husband. The lies came easy now. 3 days after David's funeral, Stephanie Monroe was found dead in her apartment. A neighbor noticed her car hadn't moved in 2 days, called the building manager. The manager used his key, walked in, found her on the bedroom floor. Another crime scene, another set of detectives. This time, though, things got complicated, because 2 murders in the same family within a week of each other doesn't look like coincidence. It looks like something else. Detective Sarah Brennan was the lead investigator on both cases. She was 47, with 23 years on the force and a reputation for being thorough. She didn't believe in coincidences. When she saw that David Mitchell and Stephanie Monroe were related by marriage, that they'd both died within days of each other, alarm bells went off in her head. Detective Brennan started digging. She interviewed Rebecca multiple times. Casual conversations at first, over coffee, at the police station, in Rebecca's home. "How are you holding up? Is there anything we can do? Can you walk me through the timeline again?" Rebecca never slipped. She maintained her composure, her story, her facade. She was the victim here. The woman who'd lost her husband and her sister in the same week. Who could possibly suspect her? But Detective Brennan did, because she'd learned over the years that the person who seems the most devastated is often the person with the most to hide. She pulled phone records. David's and Stephanie's phones showed dozens of calls and texts between them in the weeks before their deaths. Late-night calls. Texts that were familiar. Too familiar. "Can't wait to see you. Last night was amazing. I miss you already." Detective Brennan showed the records to Rebecca. "Did you know your husband and your sister were in contact this much?" she asked, watching Rebecca's face carefully. Rebecca looked at the records, looked at the detective, and then she did something brilliant. She cried. I suspected something, Rebecca said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to believe it, but I noticed them getting close. I thought maybe I was being paranoid. Oh, God. Were they having an affair? Detective Brennan's expression softened. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mitchell. It appears so. Rebecca buried her face in her hands. So he was cheating on me. With my own sister. And now they're both dead, and I'll never get answers. I'll never know why. I'll never... It was a masterclass in misdirection, because now Detective Brennan was thinking exactly what Rebecca wanted her to think. That the affair was a motive, sure. But Rebecca's reaction, her grief, her shock at the confirmation of what she'd suspected, it seemed genuine. It seemed real. And that meant Rebecca was a victim, not a suspect. But Detective Brennan wasn't entirely convinced. She kept digging. She looked into Rebecca's finances, found nothing unusual, no large withdrawals, no suspicious transactions. Rebecca had been smart about the money. She'd taken out small cash advances over 2 months from different ATMs, never more than $500 at a time. Nothing that would raise flags. She'd paid Marcus in cash, carefully counted bills that couldn't be traced. She'd used some of David's life insurance money to pay back the cash advances, making everything balance out. Clean. Untraceable. Detective Brennan looked for connections between Rebecca and any known criminals. Found nothing, because Rebecca and Marcus had been careful. One meeting. Burner phones. No paper trail. No witnesses. Perfect. Weeks passed. The cases went cold. The detectives had theories but no evidence. No witnesses. No murder weapon for David's case. No forensic evidence at Stephanie's apartment that didn't belong to her. It was frustrating. 2 people dead and nobody to hold accountable. Eventually the cases were filed away, unsolved. The prevailing theory was that David and Stephanie's affair had somehow gotten them involved with dangerous people. Maybe Stephanie had a jealous ex. Maybe David owed someone money. Maybe it was random, 2 separate crimes that just happened to involve the same family. Tragic, but not uncommon. Rebecca went on with her life. She stayed in the house, kept working at the bank. She raised her kids alone. She smiled at the right times, cried at the right times, wore black for the appropriate mourning period.